Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Driftwood Ranch. I'm Randy Ray, and this is The Literate Texan, and this is my weekly reading wrap up. But it's about a week late, so I'm actually covering like 2 weeks here. But I thought, better late than never. So I have been reading a lot, and I tend to keep multiple books going at the same time, so I've got several books to talk about here. And forgive me, my mouth is particularly dry today, so I may be using the hydration a little more than you're used to seeing me use, but that's okay, right? All right, so I've finished 3 books so far this month. The 3 books that I finished, there were 2 that I talked about in my last video. One is Galactic Patrol, okay? And I hadn't gotten very far. Galactic Patrol was written by E. Doc Smith, and it's a science fiction novel from the 1930s. And basically, it's in a series of novels called the Lensman novels. And the Lensman novels were, in part, the inspiration for the Green Lantern comic books, but also it had a big role in inspiring George Lucas in Star Wars. And when I read that and I was partway through the book, I was thinking, man, I don't see too much Star Wars in here. But as I got a little further along, okay, so first of all, let's look at the Green Lantern comparison, okay? In the Green Lantern, there's this interstellar police force, the Guardians of the Universe, and each Green Lantern gets a sector of the Guardian that they're in charge of patrolling, and they get a ring, and this ring that they use enables them to make constructs using the power of their will, okay? The Lensmen are similar. They're also an intergalactic police force. And instead of a ring, they have something called a lens. It's basically a gemstone that attunes to them. But instead of giving them the power to create physical constructs, it gives them mental powers, telepathy, mind control, and that sort of thing. And at some point in the book, of course, you could consider this whole video to be full of spoilers, by the way. So if you don't like spoilers, don't watch it. But so the Lensman, the main character in this book, gets his lens, and the Lensmen are really powerful politically. They get to do whatever they want. They're like rogue agents. They're judge, jury, and executioner. And in fact, they're a little bit like the judges in Judge Dredd, although it's not that out there or that wacky. And so the main character eventually gets hooked up with a mentor. And the mentor's name, strangely enough, is Mentor. That's his name, literally his name, which is kind of cool because there was a character on Shazam when I was a kid on Saturday mornings, and there was an old man. He drove the van as they went around on adventures, and his name was Mentor too, unless I'm just misremembering it altogether and stuff. So at any rate, it's a pretty good book. But I started to see the resemblance to Star Wars when the guy starts training with Mentor, because they literally talk about using the Force. And that's I guess part of the inspiration for where George Lucas got the Force. But it was kind of like watching Luke Skywalker get trained in the Force by Obi-Wan Kenobi, only instead of lightsabers and standing on your head and all those physical acts of prowess that involve the Force, these just involve mental feats. It was really dated. The language that they use in the Galactic Patrol, it read to me like a very, very long short story that you might have read in Boys Life magazine, which was a magazine aimed at Boy Scouts. I don't know if Boys Life is even in existence anymore, but I remember it when I was growing up. But, a lot of breathless excitement, lots of exclamation points. The characters are pretty flat. If you thought Star Wars characters were flat, you hadn't seen flat characters yet until you've read Galactic Patrol. But all in all, it was an okay book. I gave it 3 stars. It was fun to read. It was nice little branch down history. I don't know that I'm interested in reading more books in the Lensman series. I read Triplanetary a few years ago, which is also in the series, and it didn't leave much of an impression. I don't really remember what it was about. But the Galactic Patrol, that's one of the books that I've read so far this month. The next book that I read, and I was reading these at the same time, switching back and forth, was The Killer Inside Me by Jim Thompson. And I talked about it a little bit before. It's basically noir crime fiction, but it's told from the perspective of a serial killer who's the deputy sheriff in town. And I would describe it as a work of psychological horror. It reminded me of Psycho by Robert Bloch, only much better written, and I think the psychology of it seemed to me to be more accurate and a little less over the top. But the main character, he's on a killing spree, and he's really, really good at playing this aw shucks kind of dim-witted guy who basically talks in aphorisms. He's in West Texas, so everybody's kind of used to that, but he's really good at boring people. And the people get bored with him and try to get away from him and stuff. But eventually, he's killed so many people that are all connected to him that eventually it's impossible for it to hide. So eventually they do realize what's going on with him. And it all stems back to a trauma that he experienced when he was a young man. But yeah, really solid book. I gave it 4 stars. If you like that kind of thing, if you like noir fiction or you like psychological horror, then The Killer Inside Me is definitely something you might want to read. I saw the movie too. It was pretty lackluster, but if you like the book, you might check out the movie too. So, the third book that I've finished so far this month was called The Ballad of the Sad Cafe by Carson McCullers. It's not actually a novel. It's a novella. The Ballad of the Sad Cafe gives its name to the book, but also to the first story in the book, which is a novella. And then there's, I believe, 6 short stories in there too. Carson McCullers is a Southern Gothic writer. And Southern Gothic's pretty interesting genre. If you've never read anything in it, it's worth checking out. Flannery O'Connor is another author who writes in this genre, but this is what I explained to a friend of mine who's an English professor over at UNT. If it's a Southern Gothic novel, it's not enough for a character to be a dwarf. He's got to be a dwarf with a hunchback. It's not enough for a character to be cross-eyed. The character's also got to have huge feet. Everything's grotesque and weird and different. The relationships between people don't make sense to us. You don't know what the motivations are. Everything's just really weird and odd. But it was really, really good, really beautifully written. And then all the short stories were really solid too. I enjoyed all the short stories. The novella, though, The Ballad of the Sad Cafe, was definitely the highlight of the book. Carson McCullers also wrote a novel called The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, which I have not read, but I've seen the movie. It's a classic movie that stars Alan Arkin. And I remember that was a pretty terrific movie. So Carson McCullers is going on my list of authors that I need to read more of for sure. Now we're going to get into the books that I'm in the middle of. The first of those is a book I'm reading for Garb August. It's called Created, the Destroyer #1. And it was written by Warren Murphy and Richard Saper. The Destroyer novels were spoofs of other men's adventure novels that were being written at the time. And it became very popular in its own right. And I believe they got close to 200 novels in the series. Now, a lot of these were ghost written. And the tone of the books changed over time because the first book was written in the 60s. And, it's been, any book series that's gone on from the 60s on into this century, 60, 70 years, something like that, is going to change over time. There's no getting over it. But if you've ever seen a movie or heard of a movie called Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, it's based on Created, the Destroyer. And the premise is that the President of the United States has formed a very, very small secret organization that works outside the purview of the law. In other words, the Constitution's great, but sometimes somebody has to work outside the Constitution to protect the Constitution. And that man is Remo Williams. And he's a police officer who gets framed for murder and goes to the electric chair, but he doesn't die in the electric chair. He comes out of the electric chair experience and they give him cosmetic surgery so he doesn't look like anybody. And then they start training him to be an assassin. And he's trained by a Korean assassin named Chun, who is the master of Sinanju. Sinanju is also the name of the village that Chun is from. And it's a very, very poor fishing village. And in order to stimulate the economy there, they have created this martial art. They're like the ninjas, only to the nth degree. The ninjas are pale imitations of the practitioners of Sinanju. And so Remo Williams is getting an education in martial arts, although he's just a regular guy. But it also turns out that Remo Williams is the embodiment of Shiva the Destroyer. And so occasionally in his book, Shiva the Destroyer will take over, and then he becomes a real menace to whoever the bad guys are. At one time, I had read, 50 or 60 of these novels. I went through a phase where I really enjoyed them. They're not very long. They're very entertaining. If you like men's adventure novels, or you like spoofs of men's adventure novels, then the Remo Williams series is really, really good. And it's not expensive. You can get most of the books on the Kindle for cheap now. I don't think they're publishing them in paperback anymore. I think interest has waned a little bit in Remo Williams, except among a very small group of devoted fans. But I'm in the middle of that one. In fact, I've got it written down here. I've got, 186 pages to go before I finish it. But it's a fast read. 186 pages won't take any time at all. Not long ago, I was talking about reading projects and various reading projects I'd like to do. And the one that speaks to me the most and that I'm most interested in is reading all the works of Charles Dickens. And he wrote 14 and a half novels. Half a novel because The Mystery of Edwin Drood, he died in the middle of, so he didn't finish it. But I read Great Expectations within the last year and absolutely adored it. And so now I want more of Charles Dickens. And so I'm going to read them in chronological order, but I'm skipping the Pickwick Papers, at least for now, because I picked it up before and didn't like it. And I don't want to slog through the first book in this project and dislike it and lose momentum. So I'm reading Oliver Twist right now. And I've got about 540 pages to go, but I like to savor Dickens. I like to set myself a target of about 3 chapters a day and start my day by reading 3 chapters of Dickens. But Oliver Twist is, it's interesting enough. He's an orphan. His mother died giving birth to him, and he was born in a workhouse. And they don't really want him. So there are other children that are born in this workhouse too, and they all get raised by a specific woman somewhere. And then when they get old enough, they go back to the workhouse. But Oliver Twist is just a little bit different from the other kids. He's a little bit braver. He has the temerity to ask for more gruel because he didn't get enough to eat, which is something the other kids would never dream of doing. And he gets punished for it. And in the end, the workhouse people are trying to get him apprenticed to somebody just to get him out of there. And he interviews with a chimney sweep, and the chimney sweep, wants to go ahead and take him on as an apprentice. But this has to be approved by a group of men who are in charge of the workhouse. And Oliver Twist makes it clear he does not want to apprentice to the chimney sweep. It's got to be a lousy job, getting in and out of chimneys and digging around in all the ashes and stuff. But I have no idea where Oliver Twist is going, where it's going to wind up or anything like that. I've carefully avoided spoilers for that one. But anyway, I'm loving it. I don't know if it's going to be as good as Great Expectations or not, but it's going to be darn good, I'm sure. Okay, and finally, also for Garb August, I am reading Rambo, First Blood, Part 2 by David Morrell. I think almost everybody knows who Rambo is because they've seen the movie starring Sylvester Stallone. But here's the interesting thing. And he covers this in the introduction, the author does. But First Blood was a novel by David Morrell. And spoiler alert, John Rambo dies at the end of the novel in First Blood. He does not die in the movie, however. And so when they made the sequel to the movie, First Blood Part 2, they went to David Morrell and said, hey, you want to write the novelization for Rambo First Blood Part 2? And he says, well, he decided, well, yeah, why not? But he's trying to figure out how to address the fact that the character died in the previous novel. And eventually he just decided in the foreword to say that John Rambo dies in the novel and and doesn't die in the movie, and that this book is a sequel to the movie, obviously, rather than the novel. But he added a bunch of really interesting stuff about the interiority of John Rambo. He's more of a Zen master warrior than the character as portrayed in the movies. And so far, it's pretty interesting. It's a fast read, just like Created the Destroyer. You know, it's a really fast read, but it's really good so far. I'm really enjoying it. I can't wait to see where it goes. And it's been so long since I've seen any of the Rambo movies. I mean, I saw the most recent one at the movie theater, but it's not going to have anything to do with this because it was so long ago. But yeah, I'm enjoying it quite a bit. David Morrell's a fantastic writer, but let's see, I've got it written down here. I'm on page... I've got 214 pages to go in Rambo. So I've got numbers here too. I've been keeping a reading log this month. I've read 719 pages so far this month, and that averages to 42 pages a day. You know, I've had several people tell me that I read a lot faster than they do, but it's not true. I'm an average speed reader at best. I am not a fast reader. But I do read a lot because I just like to spend a lot of time with a book in my hand. So I've spent more time reading than I have talking about what I'm reading on the channel here. And I'm going to change that. I want to publish more regularly. And I'm working on that and get ready because I've got a Patreon that's getting ready to launch. And there's going to be a lot of content on there, including daily reading updates. So yeah, that's going to be even better than weekly reading updates, right? So anyway, that's my reading update that's my weekly reading update, but it's for 2 weeks. It's got some extra days in there. I'll be back soon with another video. And until then, I'm going to make 2 requests of you. Number 1, stay sexy, folks. And number 2, stay hydrated. Thanks for watching.